So Napoleon and Villain, Battle of Khyber Pass, 1738, Invasion of India. By History March, yeah. Don't know anything about this.
It is the early morning of the 24th of March, 1738, and from the highest point of the Kandahar citadel, the commander of the city's defenders, Hossein Sultan of the Ghilzai tribe, gazes down on the army that rests like a teeming hornet's nest at the edge of his walls.
Big
The
fortress.
forces of Nader Shah, ruler of Persia, have surrounded Kandahar for almost an entire year, building a completely new town, replete with streets, markets, barbers, and coffee houses at its edge.
Yeah,
A
time to do
living
that.
notice to Hossein and the city's inhabitants that they have no intention of moving, no matter how determined their resistance. Naderabad, as the boomtown is known, is now home to a depressingly large multinational force. The Persian ranks numbered 80,000 at the siege's outset, but it seems to Hossein and the Afghans that they have been joined by unending numbers of reinforcements who arrive every morning to the bustling and growing Naderabad streets.
Damn.
The effect this has on the hungry inhabitants of Kandahar is crushingly predictable. Now reduced to eating horses, but not yet starving, a victory for Nader Shah is an inevitability, but they will make him work for it. Hossein and his people have no intention of surrendering quietly. In truth, Nader has been running a surrendering.
And I was gonna say I like this fortress design, like this little top part, right? Just an extension, so they have maybe like a lookout on what looks like a mountain, right? On the other side of that mountain. Because I'm guessing on the wall on the left side, they probably can't see over the mountain. But with that little extension, yeah, they can actually see, well, have a much better view of things. Yeah, interesting design.
Quietly. In truth, Nader has been running a deception on a mass level. Every night after dark, he has large contingents in the rear of his army march out of sight, make camp, and then march once more into Naderabad with much fanfare the next morning, making it seem from the city walls that his supply of troops is inexhaustible.
That's fucking hilarious. You'd think the other side would still have some spies or something, or some people like outside the fortress trying to monitor things, and they would notice something that seems so obvious, right? That is hilarious. COVID delayed man flight this night's 2027. Thanks for the update.
On this morning, however, Hossein knows that the Persian preparations are at an end, and it is the time for battle.
Well then, I guess if he does this trick, he doesn't want battle.
Looking out at the vast numbers of Tofangchi musketeers in their
Must make
metal
them surrender.
helmets and elite Jazairchi cavalry with their Shamshir sabers glinting where they hold them at their shoulders, Hossein Sultan tries to mask a sense of dread when he considers the damage that Nader Shah's Persian army will do once they crash inside Kandahar's resilient mud walls. His eyes rove to the place where Nader Shah has placed his Tupchi artillerymen, a developing force that makes use of Zanburak, light cannon mounted on the backs of camels. It is a
cannon on the back of a camel? Wouldn't shooting a cannon on the back of an animal just destroy the animal with the recoil?
Diabolical sight to the remaining defenders on Kandahar's Borj-e-Dedi, the system of fortifications made up of towers and walls that acts as the town's shield. Since January, Nader Shah's contingents have been more offensive in their approach, their leader wishing to be moving once more. The sedentary nature of the siege, going against his instincts as a Turkmen rider who consciously styles himself on Tamerlane. Slowly, tower by tower and wall by wall, Nader's mixed force of Bakhtiari, Kurd and Abdali have fought the Afghans back, every square inch of ground a matter of conflict. Each night, the defenders work desperately to repair the damage done during the day, to keep the marauders at bay for just a few more hours.
Oh, they discovered what's
Finally, with the warm months on the threshold, the final assault begins. And the Bakhtiari lead the way once more, their combatants wishing to atone for a recent uprising against the Shah's power. All of the elements of the army that Nader Shah has constructed over the decades since he came to prominence combine, rushing from concealed trenches, caves, even strategically placed boulders where they have been camouflaging their convergence from the sentries on the battlements.
So well.
The streets and buildings of Kandahar become a charnel house. Slaughter and bloodshed are everywhere. As reinforcements rush through the streets to fight, they are shot down by Nader's musketeers, who have hacked their way onto the elevated walls and towers. Hussein shelters with his family and close retainers in the citadel, but when the remainder of the city has fallen, Nader brings up his artillery to fire point blank at the fortress and blast his way to mastery. Hussein is not slow in asking for terms. Kandahar has fallen, and Nader Shah, a most imposing figure on horseback, for he is taller than almost all other men, rides through it in triumph. It is a great and hard-won victory, but the Persian Empire's campaign is just beginning, for beyond Kandahar lies the road to Delhi, and Nader Shah has every intention of going further than any previous ruler managed, to surpass the limits even of Cyrus and Alexander 2 millennia earlier. He is going to...
Let me look at the map. Oh, the Qing Empire is over there. Okay, so China there. Okay. I think I get where we're at, more or less. Interesting. I guess it's always been like everybody's goal after Alexander to try to outdo Alexander and going farther, right? Even the actual Napoleon was like he had some dream of going to India as well. I guess everybody just wanted to outdo Alexander. That was the thing. That was the thing.
Conquer India itself. In the aftermath of his great conquest of Kandahar, avenging himself on the Afghans who in the previous decade had wrought devastation through Persia and even toppled a previous Shah, Nader had the citadel and the town itself razed and the surviving inhabitants sent to live in Nadrabad. Allowing himself the chance to savor the fact he had restored the old borders of Persia, he moved with his army only in May, arriving at Ghazni toward the middle of June, and then marching for Kabul. This brought him out of the traditional realms of the Persian Empire and over the border of the Mughal Empire. His ostensible pretext for marching into the territory of the Mughals was to destroy or capture the Afghans who had been afforded shelter there.
Of course.
In truth, most are aware that Nader is ambitious, and the state of the Mughal Empire makes it an easy target for treasure with which to pursue further wars with his Western nemesis, the Ottoman Turks. Where at the beginning of the 18th century, the Mughal Empire had controlled the vast swathe of the Indian subcontinent. The intervening 40 years has seen a succession of weak or incompetent rulers, along with internal strife and challenges from usurpers, not to mention the challenge of the Punjabi Sikhs and Hindu Marathas. Large tracts of central India had recently fallen to them, and the Emperor Muhammad Shah seemed powerless and incapable of resisting their seizures. His disadvantageous position was exacerbated by the de facto autonomy of Mughal viceroys and governors.
So it's not united.
Men like Nizam ul-Mulk, ruler of the Deccan, Khan Dauran, head of the army, as well as the Hindu bloc within the empire, and finally the governor of Awadh, Saadat Khan, who was known to be sympathetic to the Persian cause, paid
Really?
only lip service and little more to the throne. There was also the growing European presence in the subcontinent, which had first been established by the Portuguese in the last years of the 15th century, but which now included the Dutch, Danish, Swedish, and most prominently, British and French.
That is a lot.
The influence
That
of
is a
these
lot.
semi-autonomous European corporations dotted around the coast was growing every year, and they continually drifted in and out of conflict with the local and imperial authorities, even recruiting their own native forces and naval contingents.
That's
The
not good.
profits they made both for the local authorities and their backers in Europe meant that their presence was now an immovable reality, and they were observing the outcome of the conflict between the Mughals and Nader Shah with a keen interest. In truth, therefore, when Nader and his huge army rolled down from Kandahar in
They're not ready, yeah.
1738,
They're not ready.
supposedly hunting Afghan rebels, the territory actually under the control of Muhammad Shah was just a fraction of the empire over which he was purported to be absolute monarch. This weakness, coupled with Muhammad Shah's own lackadaisical nature, hobbled the Mughal war effort against such a zealous and proficient adversary. When Nasir Khan, the governor of Kabul, had begged him for just 1 year of the half-decade of back pay owed to their troops while they awaited the arrival of Nader Shah,
That's
the
too much to
emperor
ask.
had fobbed him off with promises that payment in the rainy season would be sufficient. Nader subsequently
Well.
arrived at Kabul to discover that Nasir had taken most of his men to Peshawar rather than risk a battle with such a potentially compromised force. The majority of the city surrendered to Nader, but a select number of fanatics had fortified themselves in the Kabul citadel, and Nader once more blasted them with his own light artillery, as well as some heavier grade weapons captured from the Mughals. Kabul was reduced, but Nader treated its inhabitants mercifully after their general lack of resistance, even going
Okay.
so far as to execute any of his own men who mistreated the locals.
He's still a
From
nice guy over
Kabul,
here.
he dispatched a messenger with a conciliatory note for Muhammad Shah, again avowing that his only interest in entering Mughal territory was to capture Ghilzai tribal members who were fleeing his justice. The diplomatic courier was intercepted, however, and put to death somewhere around Jalalabad. After resting at Charika, Nader's army moved in September to Gandamak, and from there to Jalalabad. News of the execution of his messenger reached Nader while he was still en route to the city, and he immediately
It's not gonna be
dispatched
a
his
peace.
elite Jazayirchi to storm ahead and bring retribution onto the governor and the inhabitants. The
All you
Jazayirchi
have to do is
arrived
not
like
kill
a
the messenger.
lightning bolt from a grey metal sky, shrieking down on the startled and dismayed sentries with such fury that they breached the walls and immediately put the entire town to the sack. The code of war broken by the killing of the Persian messenger, the Jazayirchi and then Nader's entire force were set loose to unleash a general slaughter, and any
Okay,
of the
how many
female
lens he has
locals
by this
fortunate
point?
enough to live through the initial carnage were put in chains and taken to the uncertain and foreboding future of slavery.
Damn.
Nader received word
During those days, Muhammad Shah Rongela used to be Mughal emperor, and he was incapable ruler so weak that Nadir Shah plundered his capital, Delhi, and butchered thousands of people. It's a shame.
that the governor
It's
of
a shame.
Jalalabad had fled to the hills, and a detachment of the army was sent to reduce his position. Once there, they found that the Afghans had dug trenches in the hillside, and artillery and hard fighting was required to complete the task. The same practice as had happened in the city followed, with the men being executed and the women taken into captivity.
Damn.
Nader next made camp southwest of the ruined and smoking city, where his son Reza Koli joined him. Reza had been campaigning to the north in Andkui and Balkh, eradicating the rebel elements there, but had exceeded Nader's orders and crossed the Oxus River. This could have resulted in a state of war with the Uzbeks and Khwarezm, but Reza had extricated himself, and Nader wrote assurances to the Khans of the area that he had no designs on their territories. Such insubordination would ordinarily have resulted in execution, but Nader forgave his son
so yeah.
and even appointed him
Preferential
viceroy of
treatment.
Persia
Basic.
in his stead.
Basic.
The reunion with his son over, Nader learned from scouts the following day that the former governor of Kabul, Nasir Khan, had rallied and raised a force of 20,000 Afghans, working independently.
Yeah, but how much do Nader Shah has at this point? Like earlier they said he had 80,000, but I'm sure it dwindled by now, but how much does he have?
Of Muhammad Shah's government. They were now holding the Khyber Pass, blocking the Persian advance to the south, and determined to break the invader. Characteristically rushing to meet a threat, Nader completed the 80-kilometer journey from Jalalabad to the natural fortress in the following days. By now it was early November, and winter had settled on the land and inside men's bones like a dull weight. Once at the pass, Nader saw that Nasir had indeed created a fearsome strongpoint. No fewer than 20,000 Afghan tribesmen were entrenched at the gateway to India, meaning that even though they would be outnumbered many times over, when the main Persian army arrived, the
only problem I see, like I don't know how deep the river is, but if it's very deep and there isn't much bridge, they're definitely going to be like, you know, if Nasser just comes on one side, he can beat one side at a time.
Defenders would kill multiples of their own force before Nader could clear the pass. The artillery would be of aid in dislodging the defenders, but the battle would prove to be ruinous for the Persian army, shattering it and likely leaving Nader without a sufficient host to press forward toward the center of the subcontinent. Undeterred, Nader made his camp at Barikab, and once the men present had been provisioned and rested, he immediately set about a massive engineering works in front of the Afghan positions. From the dawn, he was visible to Nasir Khan and the other enemy commanders, astride his horse and with his royal turban flying, exhorting and encouraging his men to dig the earth, clear rock, and widen the road leading up to the Afghan trenches and elevated firing points. The defenders of the pass, the arid hills around it reaching up to 1,000 meters and framed by two streams that had scraped out the acute and restricted bottleneck across which a commander could barely deploy a single company, beheld Nader Shah's legendary work ethic in person. From the early morning until the dusk, the Shah and his army worked in sight of the defenders, making it clear beyond all conceivable doubt
Delhi was kept burning for 57 days upon the arrival of Nadir Shah. Nadir also looted wealth equivalent to $126 billion into this value. That's an insane amount.
That he intended to mount a frontal attack, pulverizing the Afghans with numbers and cannon, and sacrificing tens of thousands of his men in the unquenchable pursuit of victory.
It seems stupid.
Nasir and his tribesmen remained tense while they watched the carts carry away mountains of dirt and stones. By evening,
I don't understand why he's building stuff when he's supposed to attack. Is it the plan is gonna be to feign an attack and make them actually attack his own defenses?
The terrain in front of them was as clear and flat
by like feigning a retreat or something?
as a racetrack. But mercifully, the sun dipped, and logic dictated that there would be no offensive that day.
Oh.
Nasir ordered his companies to stand down, rest in their trenches and foxholes, and sleep if they were able. A guard was posted to watch the Persian lines. On the opposite side, with one last look at the enemy, Nader Shah disappeared into the gloom, and Nasir breathed easily for the first time in hours.
Don't breathe easily, please.
He waited some time and then retired, his attendants offering him a second cloak for the growing November freeze. But, unbeknownst to the Afghans in the pass, Nader Shah had rode back in the direction of his own camp. He summoned his lieutenant, Aji Khan Beg, and ordered him to move at once with a 10,000-strong forward cavalry detachment. Nader himself would ride with them.
I mean, if they can get around, this is
command of the main army to his other son, Mortaza Mirza. He was to keep it at Barakab until further notice. Meanwhile, units under the Nasrallah Qoli, numbering about 12,000, would remain in sight of the pass. The Shah advanced south, riding toward a break in the mountains a guide has informed him lay at Satsobi.
Damn.
Soon, Nader and his 10,000 riders are shrouded in the dark of a winter night. They ride over open, roadless country, the ground strewn with rocks and boulders where it is not a steep slope. The temperature plummets past freezing, bitter winds lacerating their uncovered eyes, but there is no let-up in the pace from the Persians.
It seems like a very long pass.
Moving without maps, the Jazayirchi and their warrior monarch ascend peaks and then guardedly walk their mounts down the other side, navigating their way through some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth at the worst time of year and in the worst conditions.
Well then.
Yet they continue the relentless move southeast, the tribes who hold the area prudently staying back, aided in a large part by significant bribes.
I was gonna say, like, this is still enemy territory, so you'd think, you know, civilians or spies, or there would be someone reporting to Nasir Khan that, you know, there is this huge force of cavalry coming from behind. I mean, he's not really telling us how many days it takes for him to go around, but it seems like it would take days, right? So, you know, Nasir Khan would have time to prepare for it, either pull back or make defenses on his, you know, backside as well, but I guess maybe no one told him.
Sent ahead by Nader Shah. Even still, the threat of ambush is ever present, and no man can know for sure what kind of threat, man or beast, is lying next to them in the dark. Nader Shah and his 10,000 men propelled through the Satobi Pass and into the Bazar Valley that night in November 1738.
Just in one night. That's what it
crossing
took.
craggy, broken spurs, hundreds of feet above certain death,
Then fair enough.
in numbing and glacial cold.
I guess it's short enough.
After a final, harrowing, claustrophobic gorge, light began to grow to the east, and the hollow-eyed cavalry and their freezing horses emerged onto the Peshawar road. Nader had the opportunity to make straight for the town, but instead he turned his men directly at the enemy who were still waiting for the frontal attack they had seen Nader preparing on the other side of the pass just the evening before.
It's doomed.
When they appeared at the Afghan rear while the morning was still breaking, Nader and his men must have seemed like nightmarish
And the defense
phantoms
work doesn't matter.
emerging from the gloom. With no artillery support, the Persians relied on musket, bow, lance, and saber, careering into the dismayed and unprepared Afghans and cutting a swathe through their lines until Nasir and his chiefs managed to organize any kind of resistance.
And the other side is gonna attack him.
While this was happening on the southern side of the pass, Nader's forces under Nasrallah Qoli arrived from the north and engaged the Afghans still there, limiting Nasir's ability to send reinforcements to the unprotected southern section. The outcome an inevitability, the Afghans put up a valorous resistance, the fighting for a time being keen and ferocious.
So I'm guessing the point here, I was thinking like, why is he called the Napoleon of Iran? And by the way, this is before Napoleon actually, so maybe Napoleon is the this guy of France, I guess maybe. But yeah, Napoleon is like the crossing of the Alps, right, to get to Marengo, crossing the mountain, you know, in a super fast movement to block the enemy's retreat, basically. The Austrian trying to retreat back to Austria when they were in Italy. I guess that's what it's compared to. Do I think it's kind of different, right? So, like the Napoleon thing was like it took a couple days to a week or two or something. Like it was a bigger overall enterprise or whatever. But I guess it's a similar strategy, yeah. Similar strategy.
The muskets on Nasir's side cutting down cavalrymen before their positions were overwhelmed by saber-wielding troopers.
Damn.
The struggle then quickly devolved into a melee where the same muskets were turned to clubs. Eventually, after much bloodshed to his host, Nasir called for a truce, and he and his remaining forces were taken prisoner. As a result of the victory in the Khyber Pass, Peshawar surrendered to the Shah without a fight in the aftermath, and the road to India was now open. If he could hold his momentum, Nader would become the most powerful ruler of Persia in centuries. But while the Mughal Empire was deeply divided and rent with enemies within and without, it remained a formidable force, and Nader's battles for the wealth of the subcontinent were not yet over. His operation at the Khyber, though, had lifted him from the status of great warrior leader to perhaps the world's greatest living general, and one who would go on to live in the ages. Covering 80 kilometers in 18 hours in complete darkness, over impassable terrain, without navigation equipment. Even today, almost 3 centuries later, is a feat that could only be bettered by making use of helicopters. Russian observers were astounded, and they still remembered the accomplishment a century later, while making their own plans in the event of a war with British India. Nader Shah, the shepherd boy who became the king of kings, had created a military engine built on...
Damn, now obviously, like, this video is clearly in the middle of this guy's story, but yeah, this makes me kind of interested in the whole story from his beginning to now. Very interesting.
Tenacity, faith, strength, and vision. And as the year 1738 came to a close, there were men in throne rooms the length of Asia who speculated what force of nature or the Almighty would be required to bring this war machine to a halt.
I have no idea.
If you stayed around this far, thank you for watching.
The end. Does he die of natural causes? Does he die defeated by someone? I have no clue. I had never really heard the name before. Obviously, again, this part of the world, I don't have much historical knowledge, even though there's clearly a lot of very interesting stuff. I mean, yeah, very cool, very interesting. This whole marching, like, yeah, at first I was confused. I thought it was like at least a few days, like this slow march around the mountain, but no, it happened during the night. So I guess I can understand that, yeah, like it was fast enough that, you know, even if there were spies that would report to the other side, they might not even have time to pull back their troop from the pass or whatever, so they literally like kind of stuck themselves in the end. But also, it seemed like a lot of luck was involved in actually passing the mountain without getting lost, you know, or like wasting too much time to give the enemy the chance to retreat. Very interesting, you know, battle in history, I would say. Definitely. And yeah, definitely reminds me of the road to Marengo over the Alps. Definitely. Super interesting video. Good stuff, history march. Really, really interesting history.